Hello, good evening instead of good morning, everyone. This is a slight change of location and pace here because I have been extremely busy today. There was something that I wanted to touch on today. As I usually listen to Michael Knowles, and he likes to talk about the nature of metaphysics and the soul. He made an interesting analogy that made me think about something about the Egyptian conception of the soul, just as the Greeks had different words for love to describe it in different ways, and we just say love, and that's each approach has its own advantages, I suppose, but sometimes more words are useful. The Egyptians had more than one word for soul. What did Michael say? Well, as far as I can remember with my notes here, he made an analogy, an interesting analogy. It wasn't a perfect analogy, but no analogy is perfect. He made an analogy between the mind and the body. And I need to get this analogy spun around the right way. The mind and the body and gender expression and biological sex. So that in a sense makes some sense. I think a better analogy would be between cultural expression and the body rather than the soul. With the soul, it gets really tricky because then you're touching on that chicken and the egg problem. But I think it's very important to realize that the expression, I think the people who take this, what he thinks is too far, what I think is too far, is that you have this idea of the expression as being completely disconnected. As he says, Gnostic dualism, it's one of his favorite phrases. There are all different types of dualism. There's also the strict Cartesian mind-body dualism, which I think is more pervasive and more pernicious than what he was talking about with Gnostic dualism. But the strict mind-body Cartesian dualism thinks that we are, as Alan Watts said, a skin-encapsulated ego, and it tends that Cartesian dualism tends to lead people to see the world as mechanism, the res extensa as mechanism, and the res cogitans, what is inside our head, as what is alive and what has consciousness and sensibility. I would be committing a grand heresy in his eyes for me to admit the idea that I think that life and even consciousness is a gradation of ordered complexity. Leibniz, who was a Catholic, Leibniz believed that as well. If you read his monadology, Leibniz talks about the Cartesians have made their great error, for they do not account for perceptions which are not perceived. That is, stimulus and response. Stimulus and response still exists, even what we would call inanimate objects. One of Alan Watts' favorite tricks is he picked up a watch and he tapped on it. He said, I can tap on this watch crystal. And I'm not going to do that because I like this watch. But he tapped on a watch and it made a bunch of noise. And so that was a stimulus and response from tapping on that. And that is different only in, it's not different in kind. It's only different in kind of intensity from biological life. Ordered complexity, and this is part, he was quoting Christopher Alexander. I love how Michael quotes Christopher. He didn't quote him, he paraphrased him talking with this icon painter, and I thought that was rather impressive that he did that nicely. So my heresy in Michael's eyes would be that I would say that that life goes beyond biology. It's actually more scientific. It makes more sense, philosophically and scientifically, to think of life as ordered complexity and stimulus and response as cause and effect. And as it gets more complex, and then the miracle, the real miracle, and I think here's where he and I would align, that what he calls the soul proper, and when he says things like dogs don't have souls, what he means is that they don't have a fully aware human consciousness the way that we do. And as far as we can tell, humans have a kind of consciousness, a high order of self-awareness, where we can imagine ourselves doing things in ways that, dogs don't have flights of fancy, of planning. necessarily how they're going to do things. Even the great apes don't necessarily do that, but humans do that. And that's also part of storytelling. Storytelling, you're talking about another person, a person that you either identify with or you identify against. And that's a huge part of the way that we conduct our lives, and that has to do with narrative. Everybody talks about narrative. Well, narrative has to do, the reason narrative is important is because it speaks to your consciousness as a human. It's how you understand yourself, and a great part of how you understand yourself and how you understand the world, how you make order out of all of these jumbles of inputs, is that you assemble them into narratives. And the French philosophers, among them, I forget the guy who talked about meta-narratives. I forget his name exactly. Wasn't one of the big three. It was not Derrida, Foucault, or Deleuze. If you're going to remind me of that, any fans of post-structuralism, put it down there in the comments. But yes, the grand meta-narratives. I don't think that is to say it often gets treated in popular culture and philosophy as if those grand meta-narratives are bad, they're wrong, they're not true, because there is no truth, and you're going to tear everything down. That's just kind of a stupid way to behave. It's like, it's almost as stupid as someone who goes around saying, hey man, why do you have to keep putting labels on everything? You just got to lay, like, and then they see, you give them, say, well, what do you want for dinner? Well, we have some beans. Hey man, how can you label that? Like those are pinto beans, and like then you just pinto beans that are warm. That's called nominalism, where you specify what you call things just so much. Realism is the opposite of that. And this is some basic philosophy here. Realism is the idea that it's sensible to look at things in terms of a basic form, a basic essence. Nominalism says that that denies specificity. That's too general. But nominalism can get general in of itself when it gets really ridiculous, and that's what the postmodernists do. Like Gilles Deleuze was an ultra-nominalist. So was Derrida. That part of how they would deconstruct things would be to tear down all sense of essence, so that you have to be ultra-specific about everything and that it never ends. And partly that's a great way to ensure that you're going to permanently write academic papers that seem like they're important but are actually about nothing. I don't know if they intended that, but that's part of the way that it works, sadly. Now, the conception of the soul. You have the mind and the body. You have some dualism like this, and this is certainly realist. This is essentialist. This is realist. This is not nominalistic to even talk about these things. About something that we all share. We all share an idea of beauty. We all share an idea of the soul, or we all have a soul. You must be a realist. You can't be ultra nominalist if you believe in those things. I think some nominalism is healthy, but a lot of nominalism goes way too far. So the Egyptians, we just say the word soul. We kind of mean one thing. The Egyptians, on the other hand, had 3 words for it. 4, if you count the shadow. There was the sheot. But I don't know much about that, and that's not treated much, but that's interesting. I think Jung was into that. He was probably inspired by the Egyptian idea of the shadow. All that stuff was very current, when he was coming up and studying in the 20s and before. There's the ba, the ka, and the ach. I'm not going to get into the name of Akhenaten and how that, sufficient for the Aten. The Aten is satisfied. Those are horrible translations. That's going to be a whole video. Egyptian language and poetic metaphysics are so rich. I did this with a friend the other day. I explained the name of Akhenaten, and it took me about 15 minutes to do it. I don't think they were bored either. It's interesting. But to fully, for a non-Egyptian person, thousands of years later, to get down into all that, you got to explain a bunch of things. So, but basically, there's the ka, which the hieroglyph for that is 2 arms. I can't show it in frame. Maybe if okay, right? It's like a touchdown signal, and because that's left, right, okay, and they're mirroring each other in 2 hands, because the ka is the double. That's like the spiritual, the metaphysical. There's your physical body, which is one hand of the ka, and then the other hand of the ka, on the other hand, is the metaphysical thing, okay? And then when you die, They would believe that you preserve the form of the body. That's why they had mummification, so that the memory continues, so that the ka has the body, and then the ka will go out at night and then come back to the mummy during the day and go out at night. And there's the other part of the soul, but that's like you, but spiritual. It's very close to what we consider the soul, but then there's an important thing. There's what New Age people call, oh man, it's the higher self, man. Yes, there's the oversoul, but they call this the ba. This is shown as in hieroglyphs and paintings and reliefs as the little bird with the human head. Interestingly enough, that's how the Greeks portrayed sirens. Greeks were very aware, at least the educated Greeks were extremely aware of Egyptian metaphysics. Sirens are Italian. They're Italo-Greek. They're colonial. You had the big tough guys like Odysseus, Ulysses, whichever you want to call him, boating around in Italy. I think on Capri and Naples very much specifically, but the Italians can argue about who did what with Ulysses. It's supposedly Ulysses's supposedly Circe and Odysseus, when they were having an affair that lasted 10 years, when he was under her magic spell, that their grandson that came out of that founded Sorrento. But that's how they kind of have their mythic origins for some of the cities around there. And it makes sense that you have kind of like this tough, amazing magic lady who's probably some kind of Oscan, or maybe from some very, very old culture that we don't know about. And then all of a sudden, oh, who are these filthy, smelly guys on a boat? Oh, you're a pig, you're a pig, you're a pig. Ugh, they're awful. And then it's like, oh, who's this guy? He comes along, and then oh, he's not a pig. Oh, you got to stay with me for 10 years. And then she likes, she has this, they're delightful stories. But so the sirens, when he was all tied up and he has to listen to them, they were portrayed it's weird. I don't know why, or if it's just a coincidence, but they were portrayed almost exactly like the original sirens. They are not sea serpent ladies. They were portrayed as birds with women's heads. Interestingly enough, in Herodotus, I'm getting sidelined on a tangent, but Herodotus writes about how the Temple of Zeus at Dodona was founded. This is my favorite bit of Herodotus. The Temple of Zeus at Dodona was founded by a black bird that landed in an oak tree and eventually learned how to speak. And when it spoke, it told them, found a Temple of Zeus here. And Herodotus says, well, I certainly believe that this was an Egyptian woman speaking of Amun, because people often talk about women as birds. It's funny that the Greeks were using British slang, but same thing. And he says, well, and when she learned, and when her beautiful voice learned to speak human speech, what our ancestors meant is that she learned Greek. And then, well, why was she a blackbird? Well, because she was Egyptian. So anyways, that was, I love that story about how there's this connection from Egypt about the founding of Greek religion coming straight out of Herodotus. But yeah, that's like a bird who is a woman who's Egyptian. The Ba and the sirens are painted in the same way, but the Egyptians, they didn't think of this as just a magical lady thing. This was like a representation of the soul that everybody has, but not your ka, your oversoul, your higher self. And your ka and your ba, as long as you're in a corporeal body, they used this to describe a very real thing. They didn't pull it out of thin air. So your ba and your ka aren't always together. When you're doing things that are really good, when you're in your right mind, your ba, your ba is right around you, either on your shoulder or flying around your head. But then if you're all mixed up, your ba has just gone off somewhere. At the point of death, the ba and ka unite in a way that can't happen when you have a body. This kind of, a lot of people have this feelings. A lot of religions teach this, is that we're in an imperfect state when we're in a body, but it's because we're on an important journey. And then you have the journey after you die, and the Egyptians have this whole metaphysical thing about the da'at. A lot we could go into on that, but the word ach also means horizon. So when the ba and the ka come together, they use the same word that they use for horizon, which is ach, which is the union of the soul that happens upon the time of death. So, regardless of anybody's belief, I think it's important and interesting to talk about this in a metaphysical way as philosophy. It's one of the reasons that comparative religion is a good idea. You can at least understand ideas. If you want to be a strict Puritan, you just can't look at any of that. But I think it's a good thing to look at, no matter what your religious beliefs are, or if you have no religious belief. I have religious beliefs, but so understanding how the Egyptians describe the soul is important, because maybe a way to think about it is that the people who are struggling with dysphoria, who feel that their gendered expression is somehow ripped away from what the body is, an Egyptian would maybe look at that and say, I see, their ba has been pulled far, 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 far away from the ka. And there must be something to come back to the ba before the time of death. I do not think, I will go out here and say what I feel, I do not think that surgery is what unites the ba and the ka in that case, or what does it ever. So it's very important for people. We should take the way these people say they feel extremely seriously, and it should not be exploited. I believe it's being very much exploited. So, don't know if Michael will take a look at this. If he ever does, I am sure he'd have something interesting to say. I hope you've enjoyed listening. Yes, I have. I was so busy, I was procrastinating. So there's none of that, and I'm in the evening instead of the morning. So, anyways, thank you so much for listening. There will be tomorrow is Shabbat, no video. I shouldn't even be recording this now, really, to be strict. So I like all of those things. Thank you very much.